Presentation 12, Part A, The Injustice of Social Justice. So far in this series on socialism, we've looked at the origins of socialist thought. We've looked at the evolution of socialism from Marxism to European social democracy to American progressivism and to communism or applied Marxism. In Section 12, we'll now look at the effects of socialism on free societies. So far, we've seen that revolutionary socialism rapidly and violently transformed society to achieve complete and total egalitarianism through the collectivization of industry, agriculture, and the direct central planning of the economy. The effect on freedom in this type of society is obvious. Individual freedom, rights, and the rule of law are completely abolished. European social democrats and American progressives advocate a gradual and subtle imposition of egalitarianism and collectivism through the existing political systems. It is the incremental and destructive effects on freedom in these societies that we will explore next. Socialism's core objective, as we've seen, is egalitarianism, or the removal of economic as well as political inequalities among people. Social justice is a term used by those who favor socialism, and it means the implementation of egalitarianism. The United Nations 2006 document, entitled Social Justice in an Open World, states that social justice is broadly understood as the fair and compassionate distribution of the fruits of economic growth. Furthermore, the paper states that social justice is not possible without strong and coherent redistributive policies conceived and implemented by public agencies. The document further states that the concept first emerged in Western thought and political language in the wake of the Industrial Revolution and the parallel development of the socialist doctrine. It emerged as a protest against what was perceived as the capitalist exploitation of labor. The Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of social justice includes a state or doctrine of egalitarianism. And you'll recall from previous presentations that egalitarianism, along with collectivism and statism, are the three pillars of socialist thought. Thomas Sowell is an economist, professor, prolific author, and current senior fellow on public policy at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. In his book, The Quest for Cosmic Justice, Sowell states that one of the few subjects on which we all seem to agree is the need for justice. But our agreement is only seeming because we mean such different things by the same word. This is especially so today, when so many advocate what they call quote-unquote social justice, often with great passion, but with no definition. Sowell further states that if social justice can be distinguished from any other conception of justice, it is probably by its reaction against the great inequalities of income and wealth which we see all around us. Furthermore, Sowell points out the mirage of social justice, in the words of Nobel Prize-winning economist and free market champion Friedrich Hayek. Hayek wrote, "The manner in which the benefits and burdens are appointed by the free market mechanism would in many instances have to be regarded as very unjust if it were the result of a deliberate allocation to particular people. The reason he did not regard it as unjust was because the particulars of a free market cannot be just or unjust. The absence of personal intention means an absence of either justice or injustice. Because the free market is made up of millions of people around the world, each working to serve their own interest in such a way to make everyone else better off, personal intention cannot be attributed to such an entity." Furthermore, Sowell states those passionate advocates are driven to personify society in order to reintroduce concepts of moral responsibility and justice, seeking to rectify the misfortunes of individuals and groups through collective action in the name of quote-unquote social justice. Sowell wrote that virtually no one regards the inequalities around us as desirable in themselves. So why do inequalities persist? Perhaps the most cogent explanation was that offered by Milton Friedman. Friedman wrote that a society that puts equality, in the sense of equality of outcome, ahead of freedom will end up with neither equality nor freedom. The use of force to achieve equality will destroy freedom, and the force introduced for good purpose will end up in the hands of people who use it to promote their own interests. Sowell goes on to state that whatever the validity of this argument, and one need only think of the horrors of Stalin, Mao, and Pol Pot to realize that painful possibilities are not mere fantasies. Sowell speaks of the distinction between social justice versus traditional justice. He says the social justice is not simply a higher degree of traditional justice, it is fundamentally a different concept. Sowell explained that traditional justice or injustice is characteristic of a process. In other words, a defendant in a criminal case would be said to have received justice if the trial were conducted under fair rules and with a judge and jury being impartial. After such a trial, it could be said that justice was done, regardless of whether the outcome was an acquittal or an execution. Conversely, if the trial were conducted in violation of the rules with a judge and jury showing prejudice against the defendant, this would be considered an unfair or unjust trial, even if the prosecutor failed in the end to get enough jurors to vote to convict an innocent person. In short, traditional justice is about an impartial process rather than the results or prospects. In explaining social justice versus traditional justice, Sowell states that similar concepts of justice and fairness extend beyond the legal system. A fair fight is one in which both combatants observe the rules, regardless of whether it leads to a draw or a one-sided beating. Sowell goes on to say that applying the same rules of baseball to all meant that Babe Ruth hit many home runs, while some of his fellow players hit only a few. The career open to talents, or a level playing field, usually means that everyone plays by the same rules and is judged by the same standards. Again, if the process itself meets the standard, then no matter what the outcome, you had your chance. Sowell says, but this is not what is meant by those who speak of quote-unquote social justice. In fact, rules and standards equally applicable to all are often deliberately set aside in pursuit of social justice. Sowell states that not only does social justice differ from traditional justice and conflict with it, more momentously, social justice is irreconcilable with personal freedom based on the objective rule of law. He goes on to say that traditional justice can be mass-produced by impersonal prospective rules governing the interactions of human beings. Social justice, however, must be handmade and subjective by the holders of power who impose their own decisions on how individuals should be categorized into abstractions and how these abstractions should then be forcibly configured to fit the vision of the power holders. Merely the power to select beneficiaries is an enormous power, for it is also the power to select victims and to reduce both to the role of supplicants of those who hold this power. Social justice undermines the objective rule of law. What Sowell calls cosmic or social justice cannot be achieved with a government of laws and not of men that simply establishes a framework within which individuals are free to make their own decisions and arrange their own voluntary transactions on whatever terms are mutually agreeable. For cosmic justice, on the other hand, someone must oversee the social results of these individual transactions and intervene directly to ensure that the social results or prospects are adjusted to the taste of morally self-anointed third parties. Consequently, someone must be empowered to constrict other people's freedom. The ideal of impartiality in the law, exemplified by statues of Lady Justice blindfolded, implies that particular results for particular individuals and groups are to be disregarded when dispensing justice. Sowell states that it is precisely this concept of justice, at the heart of the American Revolution and founding, that is now being disregarded by judicial activists in favor of quote-unquote social justice. As was aptly said, the blindfolded goddess of justice has now been encouraged to peek, and she now says, first, tell me who you are, and then I'll tell you what your rights are. This is incompatible with equality of rights and the objective rule of law. In his book, The Quest for Cosmic Justice, Sowell also talks about the intellectuals and their affinity for social justice. He wrote that the only clear-cut winners in this quest for social justice are those who believe in the vision it projects. It's a vision in which those believers are so morally and or intellectually superior to others that their own relentless pursuit of this vision is seen as all that offers some modicum of hope to those who would otherwise be victims of the lesser people who make up the rest of society. He goes on to say that it's a very flattering vision, and hence one not easily given up. Evidence to the contrary is not only likely to be dismissed, but it is often blamed on the malevolence or dishonesty of those who present such evidence. Ben O'Neill from the University of New South Wales wrote an article titled "The Injustice of Social Justice." In the article, he stated that for advocates of social justice, the notion of rights is a mere term of entitlement, indicative of a claim for any desirable good. It is merely an assertion of desire and a declaration of intent to use the language of rights to acquire said desire. O'Neill writes that, in fact, since social justice inevitably involves claims for government provision of goods, paid for through the efforts of others, the term actually refers to an intention to use force to acquire one's desires, not to earn the desirable goods by rational thought and action, production, and voluntary exchange, but to go in there and forcibly take the goods from those who can supply them. True rights do not impose unchosen obligations on others. Any alleged right of one man, which necessitates the violation or subordination of the rights of another, is not and cannot be a right. No man can have the right to impose an unchosen obligation, an unrewarded duty, or involuntary servitude on another man. Key points for Section 12, Part A, on the injustice of social justice. Social justice calls for the removal of economic as well as political inequalities among people. Social justice equals egalitarianism. For advocates of social justice, the notion of rights is a mere term of entitlement, indicative of a claim for any desirable good. It is merely an assertion of a desire and a declaration of an intent to use the language of rights and the force of government to acquire said desire. A true right does not impose an unchosen obligation on others. Any alleged right of one man, which necessitates the violation or subordination of the rights of another, is not and cannot be a right.